Deep in the Oregon wilderness, where ancient Douglas firs pierced the sky like cathedral spires, Maya Chen stood before the most impossible inheritance she'd ever seen. The massive tree stump stretched 30 feet across, its hollowed center concealing a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. Her grandfather's final letter had been cryptic, "Trust no one. The roots remember everything." What Maya didn't know was that she'd just inherited more than money. She'd inherited a target on her back. The gold belonged to a cartel that had been hunting her grandfather for 20 years. And now they were coming for her. As footsteps echoed above ground and voices shouted in Spanish, Maya realized her grandfather hadn't just been a reclusive woodworker. He'd been something far more dangerous. But what secret had he taken to his grave that could keep her and her baby alive? The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. Maya pressed her palm against her swollen belly, trying to steady her breathing. She'd driven 12 hours from Seattle with nothing but a duffel bag and her grandfather's handwritten directions, following logging roads that seemed to lead nowhere until she'd found this impossible place. Maya's high school Spanish was rusty, but she caught enough. They were looking for someone or something. The gold. It had to be the gold. She clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the root wall, feeling the ancient wood pulse with life around her. The cabin was unlike anything she'd ever imagined. The walls curved organically, following the natural grain of the massive stump. Furniture had been carved directly from the roots: a bed, a table, shelves lined with books and strange artifacts. Everything glowed with a soft phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the wood itself. But it was the hidden chamber that made her hands shake. She'd discovered it by accident when her shoulder had brushed against what looked like solid root. Instead, an entire section had swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a space the size of a walk-in closet. Gold bars were stacked floor to ceiling, each one marked with symbols she didn't recognize. But this past month, when Maya had finally found the courage to leave her husband Marcus, she'd received the inheritance letter from a lawyer in Portland, a property deed, a key, and that cryptic note in her grandfather's precise handwriting. The footsteps above stopped. Maya held her breath, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the flashlight like a weapon. Her baby seemed to sense the danger. The kicking had stopped entirely. A section of the camouflaged entrance creaked. Light filtered down the spiral staircase. "Acqui," a voice hissed. "Found it." Maya looked around desperately. The cabin had no other exits that she could see, but her grandfather wouldn't have built a trap. There had to be another way out. She moved carefully along the curved wall, running her hands over the smooth wood. The root system was massive. This stump had to be from a tree that was centuries old when it died. Her fingers found an irregularity in the grain near what looked like a bookshelf. Boots on the spiral stairs now. At least 2 men, moving cautiously down. Maya pressed against the section of wall. Nothing. She tried pushing, then pulling. Still nothing. The footsteps were halfway down. Think. Her grandfather's note. The roots remember everything. She pressed her palm flat against the wood and whispered, "Chen Wei." The wall shuddered and swung inward, revealing a tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. The wood seemed to recognize her somehow, responding to her voice, her touch, her blood. "La encontre." The shout came from behind her as a flashlight beam swept the main chamber. Maya squeezed through the opening just as the hidden panel sealed itself behind her. She could hear muffled shouting, then hammering against the wall, but the ancient wood held firm. The tunnel stretched ahead of her, its walls lined with the same phosphorescent glow. She had no choice but to follow it deeper into the earth, carrying her unborn child into the darkness, wondering what other secrets her grandfather had buried in these roots, and what kind of man she'd really inherited this legacy from. Behind her, the hammering intensified, and she heard the unmistakable sound of power tools starting up. The metal box felt heavier than it should have as Maya carried it back to the main room. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from pregnancy hormones or genuine fear, she couldn't tell. The golden gleam from inside had been unmistakable, even in the dim light of her phone's flashlight. She set the box on the rough wooden table and opened it fully. 23 gold coins lay nestled in faded velvet, each one catching what little light filtered through the single grimy window. Maya picked one up, surprised by its weight. The surface was smooth, worn by time, with strange markings she didn't recognize. Not Spanish doubloons or anything romantic like that. These looked modern, almost industrial. A folded piece of paper lay beneath the coins. Maya's breath caught as she recognized her grandfather's spidery handwriting. If you're reading this, the past has finally caught up. These belong to the consortium. They've been looking for decades. The tree protects what's hidden, but not forever. Trust no one in Millbrook. The truth is in the walls. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. David's name flashed on the screen. Hey, how's the inheritance looking? His voice sounded tinny through the poor reception. It's... Maya glanced at the coins, her grandfather's warning echoing in her mind. It's interesting. Bigger than I expected. Good interesting, or tear down and sell the land interesting? I'm not sure yet. She closed the box, disturbed by how easily the lie came. The signal's terrible out here. I'll call you when I get back to town. After hanging up, Maya sat in the heavy silence. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of what was at stake. Whatever her grandfather had gotten involved with, she needed to understand it before making any decisions. She began searching the cabin more systematically. The main room held little beyond basic furniture and a small kitchenette, but the walls, her grandfather's note had mentioned the walls. She ran her hands along the rough wood paneling, looking for hidden compartments or loose boards. Behind an old calendar from 1987, she found it. A section of paneling shifted when pressed, revealing a narrow gap. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with papers. Maya pulled them out with shaking fingers. Bank statements, dozens of them, spanning nearly 30 years, all showing regular deposits of exactly $5,000 every month, always on the 15th. The account had grown to over $2 million. Her grandfather, who'd supposedly lived as a hermit, had been receiving payments for decades. Beneath the statements were photographs, black and white, grainy surveillance shots of men in suits. License plate numbers were written on the backs, along with dates and times. One photo showed her grandfather, much younger, maybe in his 40s, shaking hands with a man whose face had been circled in red ink. The final document made her blood run cold. It was a contract, written in dense legal language, but certain phrases jumped out: asset recovery specialist, exclusive territorial rights, consortium property protection, and at the bottom, her grandfather's signature next to a corporate seal she didn't recognize. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps, crunching through the forest floor. Maya quickly shoved the papers back into the envelope and grabbed the coin box. Her heart hammered as the footsteps grew closer. Through the grimy window, she saw a flash of movement, someone in a dark jacket circling the tree stump. Maya looked around frantically. There was only one way in or out of the cabin, and whoever was outside would see her if she tried to leave. Maya clutched the envelope and box, backing toward the rear of the cabin. The walls were solid, carved from the living wood of the massive stump. No back exit. She was trapped. Heavy boots descended the ladder. Maya pressed herself against the wall beside the entrance, holding her breath. A man dropped into view, tall, wearing expensive hiking boots and a jacket that screamed city money. He moved with purpose, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. His gaze landed on the table where she'd opened the box, then tracked to the displaced calendar still hanging askew. Without hesitation, he walked to the hidden compartment and reached inside, coming up empty. "I know you're here," he said quietly, never turning around. His voice carried a slight accent, maybe Eastern European. "Miss Chen, your grandfather spoke of you often." Maya's blood turned to ice. He knew her name. "You have something that belongs to my employers, something your grandfather was supposed to return years ago." He finally turned, revealing a lean face with cold grey eyes. "I'm here to collect what's owed." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing danger. Maya gripped the envelope tighter and stepped into the light. The drive to Grandfather Ezra's property took 3 hours through increasingly desolate mountain roads. Sarah's rental car struggled with the final stretch, a dirt track that seemed more suited for wildlife than vehicles. Her GPS had given up signal 20 minutes ago, leaving her to follow the hand-drawn map the lawyer had provided. The baby kicked as she navigated another pothole, and Sarah instinctively placed her hand on her swollen belly. "Almost there, little one," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. When she finally reached the coordinates, Sarah sat in her car for a full minute, staring at what had to be the most unusual property she'd ever seen. The centerpiece wasn't a house or cabin in any traditional sense. It was the massive stump of what must have been an ancient redwood, easily 30 feet in diameter. The tree itself was long gone, but the stump remained, weathered and imposing against the backdrop of towering pines. She grabbed the envelope containing the keys and property documents, then carefully extracted herself from the driver's seat. At 7 months pregnant, even simple movements required planning. The mountain air was crisp and carried the scent of pine needles and something else, something earthy and old. The first key opened a heavy wooden door that had been seamlessly integrated into the stump's bark. Sarah had to push hard against the door, which groaned on hinges that clearly hadn't been used recently. What she found inside defied all logic. The interior had been hollowed out and converted into a surprisingly spacious living area. Curved walls followed the natural contours of the ancient wood, creating an organic, womb-like space that felt both primitive and sophisticated. Solar panels visible through strategically placed skylights suggested modern conveniences, while the furniture appeared to be crafted from reclaimed wood and natural materials. The final key opened what appeared to be a storage room, but when Sarah stepped inside and found the light switch, she gasped and nearly lost her balance. Gold everywhere. Bars of gold were stacked along the walls like cordwood. Gold coins filled multiple containers. Antique jewelry and artifacts glittered from display cases. The room contained more wealth than Sarah had ever imagined, let alone seen in person. Her hands trembling, she picked up one of the gold bars. It was heavier than expected, and stamped with markings she didn't recognize. Some of the coins bore dates from the 1930s and 1940s, while others looked much older. Many of the artifacts appeared to be from different cultures and time periods. Some looked European, others Asian, and several seemed to be Native American. A manila folder sat on a small desk in the corner. Inside, Sarah found photographs, documents, and what appeared to be acquisition records. Her grandfather's careful notes detailed where each piece had come from, but the information raised more questions than it answered. Many entries were coded, referring to Collection Alpha, European Recovery, and Operation Safekeep. One document made her blood run cold. It was a letter, dated just 6 months ago, addressed to Ezra Morrison. The letterhead belonged to something called Meridian Acquisitions, and the tone was unmistakably threatening. "Mr. Morrison, our patience grows thin. The items you removed from our European facilities during the chaos of 1945 were never yours to take. We have been generous in allowing you to serve as their custodian for these many decades, but circumstances have changed. Our associates will be in contact to arrange immediate transfer of all materials. Resistance would be inadvisable." The letter was signed by someone named Viktor Kozlov, with a title that read, Director of Recovery Operations. Sarah sank into the chair, her mind racing. Whatever her grandfather had done, whatever this collection represented, it clearly belonged to people who weren't going to simply accept her inheritance as legitimate. The wealth surrounding her wasn't a blessing. It was a target painted on her back. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her distress. Sarah looked around at the gold, the hidden chambers, the elaborate security measures her grandfather had constructed. He hadn't just been hiding from the world, he'd been hiding from someone specific. And now, apparently, so was she. The beam of Sarah's flashlight caught the glint of metal deeper in the darkness. She froze, one hand instinctively moving to her belly as her heart hammered against her ribs. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the wooden depths. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped closer to the far wall. What she'd initially mistaken for shadow revealed itself as an opening, a narrow passage carved into the living wood. The metallic gleam came from beyond it, beckoning her forward, despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. The passage was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and she had to duck to avoid the gnarled ceiling. The air grew colder as she moved deeper, carrying a mineral scent that reminded her of caves. Her grandfather had carved this place with meticulous precision, every surface smooth despite the organic curves of the tree's interior. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first room, but still intimately enclosed by the ancient wood. Sarah's flashlight beams swept across the space, and she gasped. Stacks of metal containers lined the walls, each one roughly the size of a shoebox. They were old but well-maintained, with heavy latches that spoke of serious security. A workbench dominated one corner, scattered with tools she didn't recognize and what looked like old maps weighted down with stones. Sarah approached the nearest stack, her hands trembling as she worked the latch on the topmost container. The lid opened with a soft click, and she nearly dropped the flashlight. Gold coins filled the container to the brim, their surfaces catching the light like captured sunfire. Some bore dates from decades past, others looked foreign, covered in symbols and faces she couldn't identify. She picked up a handful, feeling their substantial weight, and noticed that many showed signs of careful handling. These weren't collector's pieces gathering dust. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots on the wooden floor of the cabin overhead. Sarah killed the flashlight instantly, plunging herself into absolute darkness. The footsteps moved with purpose, crossing from one side of the cabin to the other. Multiple sets, she realized, as voices began to filter down through the wood. "Told you he was dead." The words were muffled but clear enough to understand. Dead don't mean gone. Old man was too paranoid to leave this sitting around. A different voice, rougher. Sarah's mouth went dry. They were talking about her grandfather, and they were looking for something. Check everything. Floorboards, walls, that old desk has to be here somewhere. The sounds of systematic searching began overhead, furniture being moved, drawers yanked open, items scattered. Sarah pressed herself against the curved wall, hardly daring to breathe. Her unborn child shifted restlessly, as if sensing her terror. A new voice joined the others, younger but no less threatening. Maybe the old coot moved it before he croaked. Could have buried it in the woods or... No! The rough voice cut him off. Marcus wouldn't trust it anywhere but close. Too much riding on this. Marcus. Her grandfather's name sent a chill through her. These people had known him, and from the sound of it, the relationship hadn't been friendly. What about family? The lawyer mentioned an heir. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They knew about her. Some granddaughter. Lives in Seattle, pregnant according to the files. The casual mention of her condition made her stomach lurch. They'd done their research, knew exactly who she was and where to find her. She thought of David back at the hotel, probably wondering where she'd gone, and wished desperately that she'd told him about this place. We find her. We find what we're looking for. Or we don't need her at all. The menace in that statement was unmistakable. The searching continued for another 20 minutes, growing more aggressive. She heard wood splintering, glass breaking, curses when their efforts yielded nothing. Throughout it all, Sarah remained frozen in the dark chamber, surrounded by what she was beginning to understand was the reason for her grandfather's death. Finally, the sounds began to fade. Footsteps moved toward what she assumed was the door, voices growing distant. Set up surveillance. She'll be back. And, when she shows, a pause that stretched too long. We get what we came for, whatever it takes. The cabin fell silent. Sarah waited another 10 minutes before daring to turn on her flashlight again, keeping the beam low and shielded. Her hands shook as she closed the container of gold coins, her mind racing. Her inheritance wasn't just an eccentric old cabin hidden in a tree stump. It was a death trap, baited with a fortune that belonged to people who killed without hesitation. People who now knew exactly who she was and wouldn't stop until they found her. She had to get out of here, had to get back to David and figure out their next move. But as she turned toward the passage, one thought echoed in her mind with crystal clarity: running wouldn't be enough. They would never stop hunting her. The silence that followed Elena's scream stretched like a taut wire. She pressed her back against the rough bark wall, heart hammering against her ribs as she strained to hear any sound from above. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her terror, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. Minutes crawled by, no footsteps, no voices, just the whisper of wind through the massive Stump's hollow chambers. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale until her pulse steadied. She couldn't stay frozen in fear. The gold bars scattered across the floor glinted in the lantern light, their presence both a promise and a curse. Whatever her grandfather had been involved in, she was part of it now. Moving carefully, she began gathering the heavy bars, her muscles straining with each lift. The metal felt warm against her palms, and she noticed strange markings etched into several pieces, symbols that looked almost like a brand. She stacked them back in the chest, her mind racing with questions. Where had Samuel gotten this fortune, and who exactly was looking for it? As she worked, something crinkled under her foot. She looked down to find a yellowed envelope that must have fallen when she'd stumbled. Her name was written across the front in Samuel's spidery handwriting, but this wasn't the letter the lawyer had given her. This one was sealed. Elena tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page covered in her grandfather's careful script, along with what looked like a hand-drawn map. "Elena," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then they've found the cabin, and you're in more danger than you know. The gold isn't just money, it's evidence. Evidence that could destroy some very powerful people, people who thought it was buried with me." Her throat went dry as she continued reading. Elena's breath caught. Marcus Thorne. She'd seen that name in financial magazines, always photographed at charity galas and business summits, a pillar of the community with blood on his hands. "Use the map to find the second cache," the letter continued. "Hidden there are documents, photographs, and recordings that prove everything. But be careful. Elena Thorne has killed to keep this secret. He won't hesitate to kill again." The letter was signed with a shaky S and a postscript that made her blood run cold. "Trust no one in Pine Ridge. His reach extends further than you think." Elena studied the map, recognizing the rough outline of the property. X marks were scattered across it, with one circled in red ink about half a mile northeast of the Stump. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket alongside the first one. A sound from above made her freeze, the distant growl of an engine. Then another, vehicle door slamming. Her worst fears crystallized as heavy footsteps moved across the forest floor overhead, accompanied by voices too muffled to understand. Elena quickly closed the chest and dragged it behind a stack of supply crates, then extinguished the lantern. The cabin plunged into absolute darkness. She felt her way to the narrow passage Samuel had shown her in his journal sketches, the one that led deeper into the root system beneath the Stump. Elena crawled through the narrow tunnel on her hands and knees, her pregnant belly making the passage almost impossibly tight. Roots scraped against her back and dirt rained down on her head. Behind her, she heard the crash of furniture being overturned, crates being smashed open. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever. Her knees were raw and bleeding by the time she saw a dim circle of grey light ahead. Another entrance, this one emerging beneath a fallen log 50 yards from the Stump. She dragged herself out into the cold night air, gasping and shaking. From her hiding spot, she could see flashlight beams moving inside the Stump and hear the methodical destruction of her grandfather's sanctuary. These weren't random thieves. They were professionals, and they wouldn't stop until they found what they'd come for. Elena touched the letter in her pocket and thought of the marked grave on Samuel's map. Whatever secrets lay buried there, she had to reach them first. The morning light filtered through the canopy above as Maya sat at the small wooden table, her grandfather's journal open before her. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with Arthur's careful handwriting that chronicled decades of secrets. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't tear herself away from the revelations unfolding before her. June 15th, 1987. They came again today, found tire tracks near the eastern perimeter. I've moved the primary cache deeper into the root system. Sarah would be horrified if she knew what I've become involved in, but some mistakes can't be undone. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. Her grandmother Sarah had died when Maya was 12, but she remembered her as gentle, always smelling of lavender and fresh bread. The idea that she'd been kept in the dark about Arthur's dangerous dealings made Maya's stomach clench. The next entry was dated 3 months later. Miller's Cat 1987. Miller's getting suspicious. He knows someone intercepted the Portland shipment. The organization doesn't tolerate theft, even when the thieves believe they're serving justice. I should have burned it all, but the money could help so many people. Built the new wing at Children's Hospital, fixed Mrs. Chen's roof before winter, but blood money stays bloody no matter how you spend it. Maya flipped through more pages, piecing together the story. Arthur had worked for some kind of criminal organization, transporting goods and money, but somewhere along the way he'd started skimming from shipments, using the stolen funds for local charities and community projects. A modern-day Robin Hood who'd apparently made very dangerous enemies. A soft knock on the entrance hatch made her freeze. 3 deliberate taps, then silence. Maya closed the journal and moved quietly to the periscope Arthur had installed. Through the lens, she could see a pair of worn hiking boots and dark jeans. Her heart hammered as she adjusted the view upward. A woman stood above the stump, maybe 40 years old, with short auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes. She wore a Forest Service uniform and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority, not the type Maya had been expecting. "How did you know I was here?" Maya asked, studying the ranger's face for any signs of deception. "Arthur asked me to watch for you. Said you might come eventually." Catherine glanced around the forest clearing, her eyes constantly moving. "We should talk, but not here. These woods have ears. I don't understand." Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Your grandfather saved my daughter's life 15 years ago, paid for her cancer treatment when insurance wouldn't cover it. I've been protecting this place ever since, keeping hikers away, making sure no one got too curious about the old stump. But things are changing." Maya felt the baby shift inside her, as if responding to her elevated stress. "What kind of things?" "There've been men asking questions in town, strangers. They know Arthur's dead, and they're looking for what he took." Catherine's expression grew grim. "He never told me exactly what was down there, but he said if anything happened to him, I should find his granddaughter and warn her." The weight of the situation settled more heavily on Maya's shoulders. "Warn me about what?" "They call themselves the Syndicate. Arthur used to work for them, moving money and other things. But he had a falling out with them years ago. They never forgot." Maya thought about the gold bars hidden in the root chamber, about the careful documentation in Arthur's journal. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know you're in serious danger if you stay here much longer." Catherine checked her watch. "I've been monitoring radio chatter. There's unusual activity in the area. People claiming to be federal agents, but their credentials don't check out." A chill ran down Maya's spine. "Federal agents?" "Arthur warned me they might try that approach. The Syndicate has connections everywhere, people who can provide convincing fake identification. They'll pose as FBI, DEA, whatever gets them access to what they want." Maya's mind raced. She thought about David, probably worried sick by now, about the life they'd planned together, the nursery they'd started painting. Everything seemed impossibly far away from this hidden world of criminals and stolen money. "There's something else," Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur left specific instructions. If you ever came here, if you found his cache, I was supposed to give you this." She reached into her jacket and produced a small brass key. old and tarnished. He said it opens the door to the truth about your family. But Maya, he also said once you use it, there's no going back. The rain had stopped by the time Elena climbed down from the tree stump, but the forest floor remained slick with moisture. Every step squelched beneath her boots as she made her way back toward the main trail, the weight of discovery heavy in her chest. The gold bars felt like they were burning through the canvas bag slung across her shoulder, even though logic told her the metal was merely cold and inert. She paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The morning light filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, creating shadows that seemed to shift and dance with each gust of wind. Her grandfather's warnings echoed in her mind. Trust no one, tell no one, keep the secret buried. But how long could she carry this burden alone? The walk back to her car took 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Elena found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, every snapping twig and rustling leaf setting her nerves on edge. When she finally reached the gravel parking area, she was relieved to see it empty except for her own vehicle. She'd half expected to find someone waiting for her, watching. As she drove back toward town, Elena's mind raced through possibilities. The gold had to be stolen. There was no other explanation for her grandfather's elaborate hiding place and cryptic warnings. But stolen from whom? And how had a simple logger like Thomas Hartwell gotten his hands on what appeared to be millions of dollars in precious metal? Her phone buzzed from the passenger seat. "Marcus, how did it go? Find anything interesting in your grandfather's mysterious cabin?" Elena hesitated, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She trusted Marcus more than anyone, but her grandfather's words rang in her ears. "Just some old photographs and documents. Family history stuff, you know. That's it? The way you talked about it, I thought there might be something more significant." "No, nothing like that." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she pressed on. "Listen, I'm going to spend a few more days up here going through things. Take some time to process everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Elena, you sound strange. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine, just tired. It's been an emotional few days." "Okay, but call me if you need anything. And Elena, be careful up there. I know you think I'm overprotective, but something about this whole situation doesn't sit right with me." After ending the call, Elena felt more alone than ever. She pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the outskirts of Millbrook, needing time to think. The canvas bag sat in her trunk like a ticking bomb, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Inside the diner, she ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth facing the door. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, brought her cup with a friendly smile. "You're not from around here," the woman observed. "Visiting family? Something like that. My grandfather lived in the area, Thomas Hartwell. Did you know him?" The woman's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Tommy Hartwell? Sure. Everyone knew Tommy. Kept to himself mostly, especially in his later years. Shame what happened to him." Elena leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Well, the accident and all. Though some folks around here didn't think it was much of an accident." "What kind of accident?" The waitress glanced around the empty diner, then slid into the seat across from Elena. "Car went off the road up on Miller's Ridge. Real bad curve there, especially in winter. But Tommy'd been driving that road for 40 years, knew every twist and turn like the back of his hand." Elena's coffee grew cold as she listened. "You think someone caused the accident?" "I'm not saying anything for certain, you understand. But there were some strange folks asking around about Tommy in the weeks before he died. City types. Didn't look like the kind of people who belonged in these parts." "What were they asking about?" "Where he lived, what he did during the war, if he had any family. Real specific questions, if you know what I mean." The waitress stood as the bell above the door chimed, announcing another customer. "Like I said, probably nothing. But Tommy was a good man, and good men don't usually end up dead in ditches for no reason." Elena sat in the booth long after the waitress moved away, her mind spinning with new questions. Her grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered, and whoever killed him had been looking for something, the same something that was now hidden in her trunk. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the life she'd built with Marcus, about the quiet future she'd imagined. All of it felt impossibly fragile now, threatened by secrets buried decades ago in the heart of an ancient tree. The diner's bell chimed again, and Elena looked up to see a man in a dark coat scanning the room. Their eyes met for just a moment before he turned and walked back outside. Elena's blood ran cold. She was no longer alone in this. The morning light filtered through the canopy above as Maya crept through the underbrush, every snapping twig beneath her feet making her wince. She'd left the cabin before dawn, driven by a restless urgency that had kept her awake most of the night. The encounter with Kane's men had shattered any illusion of safety, and she needed answers about what her grandfather had truly been involved in. The old mining office sat abandoned at the edge of town, its weathered clapboard siding grey with age and neglect. Maya had found the address in one of her grandfather's journals, along with cryptic references to settling old debts and the Kellerman account. If Thomas had worked these mountains for decades, someone at that office might remember him, and more importantly, might know about the gold. She pushed through the rusty gate, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby stirred. 6 months along now, and every day brought new reminders that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The thought of Kane's cold eyes and casual threats made her stomach clench with something beyond morning sickness. The office door hung askew on broken hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that pierced gaps in the boarded windows. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Maya knelt carefully, sorting through yellowed claim forms and survey maps, searching for any mention of her grandfather's name. He used to come here every month, regular as clockwork. Maya spun around, her heart hammering. An elderly man stood in the doorway, his weathered face creased with curiosity rather than threat. He wore faded overalls and carried a metal detector, clearly another treasure hunter drawn to the area's mining history. "I'm sorry," Maya said, struggling to her feet. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was looking for information about my grandfather, Thomas Kellerman." The man's expression shifted, recognition flickering in his rheumy eyes. "Tommy Kellerman's granddaughter? Well, I'll be damned." He stepped closer, extending a gnarled hand. "Name's Pete Garrison. Your grandfather and I went back 40 years, maybe more." Maya shook his hand, relief flooding through her. "You knew him well?" "Well enough to know he was scared of something those last few years, started carrying a gun, jumping at shadows, said he'd made some mistakes in his younger days, and they were finally catching up to him." Pete's eyes grew distant. "Found something up in the mountains, he did. Something that belonged to people who don't forgive and don't forget." "The gold," Maya whispered. Pete nodded grimly. "Wasn't his to take, but Tommy was desperate. His daughter, your mother, she was sick, needed expensive treatment. The mining work barely paid enough to keep food on the table, let alone cover medical bills." He gestured toward the scattered papers. He falsified some claim documents, made it look like he'd discovered a new vein. But the gold came from somewhere else entirely. Where? "You ever hear of the Crimson Creek job? Bank robbery. Happened about 30 years ago. 3 men hit an armored car carrying gold coins from a private collection, killed 2 guards in the process. The robbers got away, but the gold was never recovered." Pete's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Word was, they stashed it somewhere in these mountains before the law caught up with them. More than that, Tommy was there the night they buried it. Young man then, working the late shift at one of the mines, saw lights moving through the trees, heard voices. Curiosity got the better of him and he followed. Watched them bury their treasure and mark the spot. The weight of understanding settled on Maya's shoulders like a lead blanket. Her grandfather hadn't just stumbled upon stolen gold, he'd been a witness to the crime itself. Why didn't he turn them in? Because 2 of those men died in prison within the year, and the third, Kane, he had connections. Real bad connections. Tommy knew if he talked he'd end up dead, so he kept quiet, figured the gold would stay buried forever. Pete shook his head sadly. But when your mother got sick, desperation makes a man do foolish things. Kane's out of prison now, Maya said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Has been for 5 years. First thing he did was come looking for his gold. Tommy had covered his tracks well, but Kane's patient, smart. He knew eventually he'd find what he was looking for. Pete studied Maya's face. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Maya could answer, the distant rumble of engines reached their ears. Pete's expression hardened as he moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. 3 trucks, coming up the access road fast, he muttered. You got somewhere safe to go, girl? Maya's blood turned to ice. She thought of the hidden cabin, of the journals and maps she'd left scattered across the table, of the gold bars wrapped in her grandfather's old blankets. I have to warn them, she whispered, then realized how that sounded. I have to... Go, Pete said firmly. I'll try to delay them, tell them you headed toward town. But whatever your grandfather left you, you better decide quick whether it's worth dying for. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the faces from decades past. Her grandfather stood beside a man she now recognized as Viktor Kozlov, both younger, both smiling, their arms draped around each other's shoulders like old friends. Behind them loomed the familiar outline of the ancient oak that would become her sanctuary and her prison. This changes everything, she whispered, her free hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her distress. She flipped the photo over, in her grandfather's careful handwriting, VK and me, 1987, before it all went wrong. The truth is in the roots. For Sarah, if something happens to me. The musty air of the hidden compartment seemed to press against her lungs as she rifled through more documents. Bank records showing massive deposits and withdrawals, letters written in what looked like Russian, and then a journal entry that made her blood freeze. Victor trusted me with everything, his escape route from the old country, his contacts, his gold, but I can't be part of what he's become, the people he's killed. I have to disappear the treasure, make it look like I betrayed him. It's the only way to protect my family. If Sarah ever reads this, she needs to know I was never the criminal. I was trying to stop one. Sarah's mind reeled. Her grandfather hadn't stolen the gold. He'd hidden it to protect innocent people from Victor's violence. But that distinction would mean nothing to the men hunting her now. A sudden vibration through the tree's massive trunk made her look up sharply. Footsteps overhead, multiple sets, moving with purpose across the forest floor above her sanctuary. She quickly stuffed the documents into her jacket and sealed the compartment, her movements urgent but quiet. The baby seemed to sense danger, its movements becoming more agitated as she crept toward the periscope. Through the narrow viewing device, she saw them. 6 men in dark clothing spread out in a wide search pattern. They moved with military precision, checking every depression in the earth, every fallen log, every possible hiding place. Victor stood in the center of their formation, his silver hair catching the filtered sunlight as he gestured to his men. They were close, too close. Sarah's escape tunnel suddenly felt like a lifeline, but she knew she couldn't outrun them in her condition. Not with the baby due any day now. She needed to think, to use the advantages she had. She moved to her grandfather's desk and pulled out the detailed maps of the underground passages. Her finger traced the network of tunnels he'd carved over decades. Most led to the surface, but one led somewhere else entirely. According to the map, there was a passage that connected to an old mine shaft nearly a mile away. If she could reach it, she could emerge far from the search area and make it to her car, which she'd hidden in an abandoned logging station. But the tunnel was narrow, partially flooded, and marked with her grandfather's warning, emergency use only. Dangerous. Another vibration shook the tree. They were digging now, she realized, probing the earth around the oak's base with metal rods, searching for hollow spaces. Sarah made her decision. She grabbed her emergency pack, checked that the documents were secure in her jacket, and headed for the tunnel entrance, hidden behind a false wall in the back corner of the cabin. The passage beyond was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and she had to crawl on her hands and knees through the damp earth. The baby protested every jarring movement, sending sharp pains through her lower back. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood as she forced herself forward through the claustrophobic darkness. 20 feet in, her hands splashed into icy water. The tunnel floor disappeared into a flooded section that stretched ahead into blackness. She had no choice but to continue, the water reaching her chest as she half swam, half crawled through the submerged passage. The cold shocked her system, and she felt the baby's movements become erratic. Panic fluttered in her chest. She couldn't lose the baby now. Not when she was so close to the truth, so close to finding a way out of this nightmare. Her lungs burned as she pushed forward, following the faint current that indicated airflow ahead. Just as her strength began to fail, her hands found solid ground again. She dragged herself from the water, gasping and shivering, her clothes plastered to her body. A distant rumbling echoed through the earth behind her. They'd found something. Whether it was the cabin itself or just another false lead, she couldn't tell, but the sound spurred her forward through the rising tunnel. Light appeared ahead, not artificial, but the grey glow of an overcast sky. The mine entrance materialized around a final bend, its wooden supports rotted but still standing. Sarah emerged into the fading afternoon, her body shaking from cold and exhaustion. Behind her, somewhere in the vast forest, Victor's men were still searching. But now she had something they didn't know she possessed, the truth about what really happened 37 years ago, and she intended to use it. The generator hummed to life on the third pull, its mechanical growl echoing through the hollow chamber of the tree. Maya's hands trembled as she connected the power cable, flooding the underground space with harsh fluorescent light that made everything look stark and unforgiving. The walls seemed to close in around her, the weight of the massive stump above pressing down like a living thing. She had maybe an hour before they found her trail. The blood drops leading from the forest would be easy enough to follow once daylight came, and she'd left boot prints in the soft earth near the hidden entrance. Her grandfather's sanctuary was about to become her tomb, unless she found another way out. The safe stood open like a mouth, its steel jaw revealing the glittering treasure within. Gold bars stacked in neat rows, each one worth more than she'd ever seen in her lifetime. But now she understood the true cost of such wealth. Blood money, her grandfather had called it in one of his journal entries. Payment for sins that could never be washed clean. Maya pulled out the remaining journals, her fingers sticky with dried blood from the cut on her palm. The leather covers were worn smooth by countless readings, filled with Edwin's careful handwriting that grew more erratic as the years passed. She flipped to an entry dated 3 months before his death. Say no about the location. Someone talked. After all these years, someone finally talked. I should run, but I'm too old and too tired. Let them come. The tree has protected worse secrets than this one. Her breath caught. 3 months. He'd known they were coming for 3 months and hadn't tried to hide the gold or warn anyone in the family. Why? She turned the page, scanning for answers. The girl came by today, Maya. She looks just like her grandmother did at that age. Strong jaw, stubborn eyes. She'll need that strength for what's coming. I've changed my will. She deserves a chance at the truth, even if it kills her. The words hit her like a physical blow. He'd known. Somehow, Edwin had known she would be the one to inherit this nightmare. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her distress, and she pressed a protective hand to her belly. I won't let anything happen to you, she whispered. I promise. A new sound reached her ears through the generator's noise, the distant rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving through the forest with purpose. They'd found her faster than expected. Maya stuffed the journals into her jacket and grabbed a small canvas bag from the safe, filling it with as many gold bars as she could carry. The weight pulled at her shoulders, but she'd need leverage if she was going to survive this. The cabin had seemed like a single room when she'd first discovered it, but now she noticed something odd about the far wall. The wood grain didn't match the rest of the paneling, and when she pressed against it, it gave slightly under pressure. A hidden door. She ran her fingers along the edges until she found the catch. A small lever disguised as a knot in the wood. The panel swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The smell that wafted out was earthy and damp, tinged with something else, something that made her stomach turn. The engines were getting closer. She could hear voices now, shouting orders. They'd found the entrance. Maya grabbed a flashlight from Edwin's workbench and squeezed through the hidden door, pulling it closed behind her just as heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs into the main room. The tunnel was barely wide enough for her body, forcing her to move in a crouch that put strain on her back and legs. The baby seemed to sense the urgency, remaining still as she navigated the cramped passage. Behind her, she heard crashes and curses as the men tore apart her grandfather's sanctuary. They'd find the hidden door eventually, but maybe not before she reached wherever this tunnel led. The flashlight beam revealed rough wooden supports holding up earthen walls. This wasn't a recent addition. The tunnel had been here for decades, maybe longer. The path began to slope upward, and fresh air touched her face. An exit. She crawled faster, ignoring the protests from her knees and the growing ache in her lower back. The gold bars clinked together in the canvas bag, their weight both burden and salvation. The tunnel ended at another wooden door, this one secured with a simple latch. Maya listened carefully but heard nothing beyond. She turned off the flashlight and eased the door open, emerging into the pre-dawn darkness of the forest floor. She was at least 100 yards from the tree stump, hidden behind a cluster of boulders that concealed the tunnel exit perfectly. In the distance, she could see lights moving around Edwin's hiding place. They'd brought more men this time, professional men with professional equipment. Maya shouldered the bag of gold and began moving through the trees, each step taking her further from safety but closer to the truth she was finally ready to face. The baby kicked hard against Elena's ribs as she crouched behind the massive root system, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air. Through the tangled wood, she could see 3 figures moving systematically through the forest, their voices carrying on the wind. They were getting closer. "She can't have gone far," one of them called out. "Pregnant woman, middle of nowhere, she's probably holed up somewhere nearby." Elena pressed her palm against her belly, silently willing the baby to be still. The gold bars felt impossibly heavy in her backpack, but she couldn't abandon them now. They were her only bargaining chip, her only chance at negotiating a way out of this nightmare. Her grandfather's journal crinkled as she shifted position. The final pages she'd read last night had revealed everything. How Samuel Reeves had discovered the money laundering operation, how he'd stolen not just gold, but detailed records of every transaction, every name, every crime. The gold wasn't just stolen wealth, it was evidence that could destroy an entire criminal network. The footsteps grew louder. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering the escape routes her grandfather had mapped throughout the journal. He'd been paranoid, yes, but he'd also been thorough. Every contingency planned, every possible threat considered. "Check that depression over there," another voice ordered. Female this time, cold and efficient. "Marcus, take the eastern perimeter. I want every hiding spot searched." Elena recognized the voice from the phone calls that had been plaguing her for weeks. The woman who'd claimed to be from her grandfather's bank, who'd been asking pointed questions about his property. Not a banker at all, but someone much more dangerous. A twig snapped 20 feet away. Elena's heart hammered as she saw boots appear through gaps in the root system. Black tactical gear, military precision. These weren't common criminals, they were professionals. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the life they could have if she could just survive the next few hours. The ultrasound photo tucked into her jacket pocket seemed to pulse against her chest, a reminder of everything she had to lose. The boots moved closer. Elena could hear the person breathing, methodical and calm. She clutched the small pistol she'd found in her grandfather's emergency cache, though she'd never fired a weapon in her life. Her hands trembled as she tried to remember the basic safety instructions scrawled in the journal's margins. "Nothing here," the searcher called out, but the boots didn't move away. Elena could sense hesitation, suspicion. She held her breath until her lungs burned. Finally, the footsteps retreated. Elena waited another 5 minutes before allowing herself to exhale. Through the roots, she watched the 3 figures regroup near the tree stump entrance. From this distance, she could see them clearly for the first time. The woman was tall and severe, her graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She moved with military bearing, constantly scanning the surroundings. The 2 men flanking her looked like hired muscle, broad shoulders, watchful eyes, hands never far from concealed weapons. "She knows we're here," the woman was saying, "which means she knows what she has. We need to change tactics." Elena strained to hear more, but their voices dropped to whispers. She watched them examine the hidden entrance to the underground cabin, saw them descend into the tree stump with practiced efficiency. They'd been here before, she realized, probably searching for the gold while she'd been ignorant of its existence. Her phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her blood run cold. "We have your apartment surrounded. We know about the baby. Let's talk." Elena's mind raced. They'd done their homework, knew everything about her life. But they were also trying to negotiate, which meant they weren't entirely confident they could find her by force. The forest was vast, and her grandfather had taught her well through his detailed notes. Another message arrived: "The gold for your safety, simple exchange. You have 1 hour." Elena studied the photos attached to the text. Surveillance images of her apartment building, her car, even the grocery store where she shopped. They'd been watching her for weeks, probably since the first day she'd inherited the property. But there was something desperate in their approach now, something that suggested time was running out for them too. She opened her grandfather's journal to the final entry, reading his words again. "If they find you, remember, they need the gold more than they want you dead. Use that. The truth is your weapon, but timing is everything." Elena checked her watch. 1 hour. Enough time to reach the secondary cache her grandfather had described, the one with the radio equipment and additional supplies. She shouldered her pack and began moving deeper into the forest, following the cryptic markers Samuel had left decades ago. Behind her, voices echoed from the tree stump. The hunt was intensifying, but Elena finally understood the game she was playing. Now she had to win it. The storm had passed, leaving the forest eerily quiet, except for the steady drip of water from overhead branches. Sarah pressed her back against the rough bark of an oak tree, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, and the baby seemed restless, shifting constantly as if sensing her fear. Marcus had been gone for over an hour. He'd promised to circle back to the cabin and check if Kozlov's men had moved on, but doubt gnawed at her. What if they'd caught him? What if he wasn't coming back at all? She closed her eyes and tried to think clearly despite the exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. The leather journal was still tucked inside her jacket, its weight both comforting and terrifying. Her grandfather's final entries had revealed more than she'd bargained for. Not just the location of the remaining gold, but the names of everyone involved in the original heist. Names that included people she'd never suspected. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. Too heavy to be Marcus, too deliberate to be an animal. Sarah peered around the tree trunk and saw 2 figures moving through the underbrush, their dark clothing making them hard to spot among the shadows. Kozlov's men, still searching. She held her breath as they passed within 20 feet of her hiding spot, their voices carrying clearly in the still air. "Boss is getting impatient," one of them said in accented English. "We should have found her by now." "The gold's been hidden for 30 years. It's not going anywhere," the other replied. "But the woman knows where it is. That journal her grandfather left, it has to contain the location. What if she doesn't cooperate?" A pause. "Then we make her cooperate. Pregnant women have a lot to lose." The casual cruelty in his voice made Sarah's blood run cold. She waited until their footsteps faded completely before emerging from behind the tree. Whatever Marcus found at the cabin, she couldn't stay here any longer. These men weren't going to give up, and every minute she remained in the forest put both her and the baby at greater risk. The journal crinkled as she pulled it out to check the map her grandfather had drawn on the final page. According to his notes, there was an old mining tunnel about 2 miles northwest of the cabin, abandoned since the 1940s. That's where he'd hidden the bulk of Kozlov's stolen gold, along with what he called his insurance policy, evidence of who had really orchestrated the robbery all those years ago. Sarah studied the crude landmarks her grandfather had sketched. A lightning-struck pine, a creek that bent sharply east, a pile of stones arranged in a triangle. She could find it, but not with her injured ankle and not while being hunted. She needed help, and that meant finding Marcus or getting to town where she could call the police. The decision was made for her when she heard the distant sound of an engine, a car or truck, moving slowly along what had to be the old logging road that connected to the main highway. If she could reach it, flag down help. Moving as quickly as her ankle would allow, Sarah began making her way toward the sound. The terrain was treacherous, still slick from the storm, and every step sent sharp pain shooting up her leg. But the engine noise was getting closer, and with it, the possibility of escape. She burst through a line of saplings and found herself at the edge of a dirt road. A black SUV was approaching slowly, the driver obviously searching for something, or someone. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the vehicle. She'd seen it parked outside her apartment building in the city, back when this nightmare had first begun. These weren't potential rescuers. They were more of Kozlov's people. She ducked back into the trees just as the SUV drew level with her position. Through the windshield, she could see the driver speaking into a radio, coordinating with the men on foot, no doubt. The net was tightening. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the constant stress and movement. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly and whispered an apology. None of this was the peaceful pregnancy she'd imagined. Instead of preparing a nursery and choosing names, she was running for their lives through a forest, carrying secrets that had already cost too many people everything. The SUV moved past, but Sarah knew they'd be back. They were conducting a systematic search, closing off escape routes one by one. Her only advantage was that they still needed her alive. The journal might contain clues, but without her to interpret her grandfather's cryptic notes and lead them to the exact location, the gold would remain hidden. It was a slim advantage, but it was all she had. That, and the hope that Marcus would find her before Kozlov's men did. The flashlight beam trembled in Maya's grip as she stared at the body slumped against the far wall of the hidden chamber. Even in death, her grandfather's face held that stubborn determination she remembered from childhood photographs. But the bullet hole in his chest told a story she wasn't prepared for. "He's been dead for weeks," she whispered, her voice echoing off the earthen walls. The air down here was thick and stale, carrying the metallic scent of old blood and something else, fear. Her baby kicked hard, as if sensing the danger that permeated this place. Maya pressed her hand to her belly, trying to steady her racing heart. She needed to think clearly now, more than ever. A leather journal lay open beside her grandfather's body, its pages yellowed and brittle. With shaking fingers, she picked it up and began to read his final words, written in the cramped handwriting she recognized from old birthday cards. "You're reading this, Maya? Then they found me before I could make things right. The gold isn't just stolen, it's blood money. Every bar represents lives lost, families destroyed. I tried to return it, tried to make amends, but Marcus Cordero doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget." Maya's breath caught. Marcus Cordero. She'd heard that name whispered in the shadows of her research, a figure so dangerous that even hardened criminals spoke of him in hushed tones. "Took the gold 40 years ago, thinking I was stealing from criminals who'd never be caught. I was young and desperate, with a family to feed. But I learned too late that some thieves are more dangerous than any law. Cordero has spent decades hunting for his missing fortune, and now he's found it. The journal's pages rustled as Maya turned them, each word adding weight to the nightmare she'd stumbled into. Her grandfather's handwriting became more erratic as the entries progressed, betraying his growing desperation. "I've hidden what I could, scattered pieces across the property. The main cache is beneath the old oak, but there are smaller stashes. Insurance, I hoped. Now I see it was foolish. There's no negotiating with a man like Cordero. If he finds this place, if he finds you—" A sound from above made Maya freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots moving across the wooden floor of the cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clicked off the flashlight, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. She could hear muffled voices, at least 2 people, maybe 3. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Maya clutched the journal to her chest and felt along the wall with her free hand, searching for another way out. The chamber was larger than she'd initially realized, extending back into the massive root system of the ancient tree. Her fingers found rough wooden planks, then the cold metal of what felt like a door handle. The handle turned easily, revealing another passage. This one sloped upward, following the natural curve of the roots. Maya hesitated, torn between the known danger above and the uncertainty ahead. The decision was made for her when she heard the scrape of the bookshelf being moved aside. Light flooded down the shaft as someone found the entrance to the chamber. Maya pressed herself against the passage wall, holding her breath. "He's still here," a voice called up. Cordero was right. The old man never left his precious hiding spot. "Any sign of the granddaughter?" Another voice, rougher, with an accent she couldn't place. "Not yet, but she's been here recently. Food in the kitchen, fresh tire tracks outside." Maya bit back a gasp. They'd been watching her, tracking her movements. She thought of Jake, hoped desperately that he'd stayed away as she'd asked. The last thing she needed was to put him in danger too. "Tear this place apart," the first voice commanded. "Every board, every stone. The gold has to be here somewhere." Maya didn't wait to hear more. She turned and began moving up the passage, using her hands to guide her in the darkness. The wooden walls gave way to packed earth, then to what felt like natural stone. The passage was climbing steadily now, following the massive taproot toward the surface. Behind her, she could hear the men entering the chamber, their voices growing fainter as she climbed. But she knew they'd find the passage soon enough. Her grandfather had been thorough in his preparations, but 40 years of paranoia could only do so much against determined killers. The passage began to level out, and Maya caught a faint whiff of fresh air. Somewhere ahead was another exit, another chance. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. She pulled out her phone, using its dim light to read more of the journal. Her grandfather's final entry was dated just 3 days ago. "They're coming. I can feel it. Cordero's patience has finally run out. But I've left clues, Maya. Follow the old survey markers. Find the truth about what really happened that night in 1983. The gold is just the beginning. The real secret is buried deeper than any treasure." The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jolting Maya from an uneasy sleep. She'd been dreaming of her grandfather again, his weathered hands guiding hers over the carved symbols in the cabin walls, whispering words she couldn't quite understand. The static-filled voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "All units, we have a confirmed break-in at the Whitmore property. Suspects are armed and considered extremely dangerous." Maya's blood turned to ice. She grabbed the radio with trembling hands, her 8-month belly making every movement awkward and urgent. "Sheriff Morrison, this is Maya. How many of them are there?" "Stay down and stay quiet," Morrison's voice crackled back. "We count at least 4 vehicles. These aren't local boys, Maya. They came prepared." Through the narrow window carved into the tree's natural wood, Maya could see flashlight beams dancing between the trees like deadly fireflies. The Kozlov syndicate had finally found her grandfather's sanctuary. After 3 weeks of careful hiding, her time had run out. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. Maya pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering soothing words she didn't believe herself. She had to think clearly now. Panic would kill them both. The hidden gold cache lay beneath the cabin's floor, exactly where her grandfather's journal had promised. 47 bars of stolen Nazi gold, each one worth a fortune, each one stained with blood from decades past. The Kozlovs wanted their grandfather's treasure back, and they'd tear apart everything in their path to find it. Maya moved carefully through the cabin's main room, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden boards. Her grandfather had designed this place as more than a hiding spot. It was a fortress. She triggered the hidden panel beside the stone fireplace, revealing an arsenal that would have impressed a small army. The old man had been preparing for this day long before she was born. Her fingers closed around the familiar weight of the Glock she'd been practicing with. 3 weeks of target practice in the woods had transformed her from a terrified librarian into something harder, more dangerous. She had to survive this. Her daughter depended on it. The radio whispered again. They're at the main entrance to the Stump, moving in formation like military. Maya's mind raced through her grandfather's escape routes. The tree's massive root system contained a network of tunnels he'd excavated over 30 years. She could disappear into the underground maze, but not with the gold. 47 bars weighed nearly 600 pounds. She'd never manage it alone, especially not in her condition. A new sound froze her blood, the distinctive whine of power tools cutting through wood. They'd brought equipment to breach the Stump's natural defenses. Her grandfather's journal had warned about this scenario. If they come with saws, you have 15 minutes before they reach the inner chambers. 15 minutes to decide between her life and a fortune in stolen gold. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and suddenly Maya's choice became crystal clear. She'd spent weeks agonizing over the moral weight of keeping Nazi treasure, wondering if her grandfather's sins had somehow passed to her unborn child. But facing imminent death, all that philosophical torment evaporated. Her daughter's future mattered more than gold from the past. Maya triggered the cabin's final defense mechanism, a system her grandfather had installed but never explained fully. Hidden charges throughout the tree's lower chambers would collapse the tunnels, sealing the gold cache forever. The Kozlovs could tear apart the surface all they wanted. They'd never reach their prize. Her shaking fingers found the red switch behind the false panel. One flip would bury millions in stolen treasure beneath tons of earth and twisted roots. The Kozlov syndicate would have no reason to hunt her anymore. She'd be just another pregnant woman with nothing they wanted. The cutting sounds grew louder, closer. Wood chips scattered through cracks in the walls as industrial saws bit deeper into the Stump's protective shell. She could hear voices now, harsh syllables in a language she didn't recognize, but understood perfectly. The international dialect of violence and greed. Morrison's voice crackled urgently. "Maya, they've almost breached the outer defenses. You need to move now." Her thumb hovered over the detonation switch. Destroying the gold would save her life but leave so many questions unanswered. Her grandfather's journal hinted at other secrets, deeper mysteries about their family's connection to the treasure. Walking away meant never knowing the full truth about her heritage. The baby delivered a particularly forceful kick, and Maya smiled despite her terror. Her daughter was already making her opinion known. The future mattered more than the past. She flipped the switch. The rumble started deep beneath her feet, growing into a thunderous roar that shook the entire tree. Somewhere below, charges detonated in sequence, collapsing tunnels and sealing chambers that had hidden stolen treasure for 70 years. Maya grabbed her emergency pack and headed for the escape tunnel. Behind her, the sounds of cutting stopped abruptly as confused voices shouted through the darkness. Sarah's hands trembled as she sealed the final explosive charge to the tree's main support beam. The ancient wood groaned ominously above her, as if sensing its impending destruction. Marcus worked frantically beside her, rigging the detonator while keeping one eye on the tunnel entrance, where Elena and her men would soon emerge. "How much time do we have?" Sarah whispered. her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of approaching footsteps echoing through the underground passages. "Maybe 3 minutes before they break through that barricade," Marcus replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool underground air. "These charges will bring down the entire root system, but we need to be at least 200 yards away when they blow." Sarah pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. Her grandfather's final letter crinkled in her pocket, the one she'd found hidden in his desk drawer. The truth it contained still burned in her mind, how he'd stolen the gold not from criminals, but from Elena's father during a partnership gone wrong decades ago. How Elena was actually her grandfather's business partner's daughter, seeking revenge for her family's destruction. "There," Marcus said, connecting the last wire. "The timer's set for 4 minutes. We need to move now." They scrambled toward the emergency exit her grandfather had carved into the far wall, a narrow passage that led to the surface through a network of natural cave formations. Sarah's pregnancy made the tight squeeze agonizing, but adrenaline drove her forward. Behind them, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the main chamber. "They're through," Marcus hissed. Elena's voice carried through the tunnels, cold and calculating. "Search everything. The gold has to be here somewhere. And find the woman. She's the key to this whole puzzle." Sarah bit back a gasp. They hadn't discovered the gold's new location yet. Over the past 2 days, she and Marcus had worked tirelessly to move every bar from the hidden vault to a new cache 50 miles away, buried beneath an abandoned ranger station that her grandfather had mentioned in his journals. The fortune Elena sought was no longer here, but Sarah knew the woman wouldn't believe that without proof. The narrow passage opened into a wider cavern, lit by natural skylights, filtering down from the forest floor above. Sarah could see the ladder her grandfather had installed years ago, leading up to a concealed exit behind a cluster of boulders. Freedom was within reach. "Wait!" Marcus grabbed her arm. "Listen!" Footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Elena had split her team, sending some through the main tunnels while others circled above ground. They were trapped between 2 forces, with nowhere to run. "The timer," Sarah whispered. "How long?" Marcus checked his watch. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. A flashlight beam swept across the cavern entrance behind them. Elena's voice grew closer. "I can hear you, Sarah. There's nowhere left to run. Your grandfather cost my family everything. Our business, our reputation, our future. The least you can do is return what he stole." Sarah felt a surge of anger override her fear. "He didn't steal anything. I found the real contracts in his safe. Your father was skimming profits for years, planning to disappear with the entire operation. My grandfather just beat him to it." The flashlight beam fixed on them. Elena emerged from the passage, her expensive clothes torn and dirty from navigating the tunnels. 3 armed men flanked her, their weapons trained on Sarah and Marcus. "Interesting theory," Elena said, her smile cold, "but irrelevant. The gold is mine by right of survival. My father's failures don't erase what your grandfather took from us." "The gold isn't here anymore," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "We moved it." Elena's composure cracked slightly. "Impossible. We've been watching this place for weeks." "Not well enough." Sarah's hand moved to her pocket, fingers closing around her grandfather's letter. He left detailed instructions. "Everything you're looking for is gone." 1 minute 40 seconds. Elena raised her pistol. "Then you'll simply have to tell me where you moved it." "Even if I wanted to," Sarah said, "I couldn't. The location is encoded in a system only my grandfather understood. The key died with him." It was a lie, but a convincing one. Elena's eyes narrowed, calculating the possibilities. The baby kicked hard against Sarah's ribs, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Search them," Elena ordered her men. "Check every pocket, The first explosion shattered the night, followed immediately by a chain reaction that shook the entire cavern. Dust and debris rained down as the massive tree stump above them began its collapse. Elena's men stumbled, momentarily blinded by the chaos. Marcus lunged forward, tackling the nearest gunman as Sarah scrambled toward the ladder. The ancient tree's death throes echoed through the earth like thunder, and Sarah knew they had seconds before the entire underground complex became their tomb. The cabin's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the walls as Maya pressed herself against the reinforced door, listening to the sounds above. Heavy footsteps moved across the forest floor, accompanied by the crackle of radio static and muffled voices. The Kozlov crew had found them. "How many?" whispered Detective Chen, checking her weapon while keeping her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Maya held up 3 fingers, then pointed in different directions. She'd counted at least that many distinct voices, but there could be more spreading out through the woods. Her grandfather's paranoid security measures were about to be put to the ultimate test. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger. Maya placed a protective hand over her belly and moved toward the hidden panel where her grandfather had concealed his most important documents. If they didn't survive this, at least the evidence of the Kozlovs' crimes would remain for someone else to find. A sharp bang echoed from directly overhead, followed by the sound of splintering wood. They'd found the camouflaged entrance. "Maya Carson!" Victor Kozlov's voice boomed through the earth above them. "I know you're down there. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but that gold is coming home with me tonight." Chen positioned herself behind the heavy wooden table, using it as cover while she aimed at the main entrance. "Is there another way out of here?" Maya nodded toward a narrow passage she'd noticed earlier behind a shelf of her grandfather's journals. "Emergency tunnel, but I don't know where it leads. Better than being trapped down here." Chen's voice was steady, but Maya could see the tension in her shoulders. "Get to that tunnel. I'll hold them off as long as I can." The sound of metal striking rock reverberated through the cabin as the intruders worked to break through the concealed entrance. Her grandfather had built well, but even his defenses had limits. Maya grabbed a small backpack and stuffed it with the most critical documents: bank records, photographs, and a leather journal that contained what looked like decades of notes about the Kozlov family's operations. The gold bars would have to stay behind, but the evidence might be worth more than any treasure. A section of the ceiling suddenly gave way, sending dirt and debris cascading onto the cabin floor. A rope dropped through the opening, followed immediately by the barrel of an assault rifle. Chen didn't hesitate. Her first shot sent splinters flying from the wooden beam near the hole, forcing the intruder back up. "Go! Now!" Maya squeezed behind the bookshelf and found the hidden passage, barely wide enough for her pregnant frame. The tunnel stretched into darkness, carved roughly from the earth and reinforced with timber supports. She could hear gunfire erupting behind her as she crawled forward on her hands and knees. The passage seemed to go on forever. Her back ached and the baby's movements made it difficult to maintain her balance on the uneven ground. Somewhere behind her, the sound of gunfire had stopped, replaced by shouting voices and the crash of furniture being overturned. They were searching the cabin. A faint current of cool air touched her face, suggesting an exit ahead. She pressed forward desperately, knowing that Chen might be wounded or worse, and that the tunnel wouldn't remain secret for long. These men had probably been searching for this place for years. They would be thorough. The passage finally opened into a small cave, barely large enough to stand in. Moonlight filtered down through a crack in the rock above, and Maya could see star-filled sky through the narrow opening. She was perhaps a quarter-mile from the cabin, hidden in an outcropping of granite that formed a natural chimney. As she caught her breath, Maya heard the distinctive sound of an explosion echoing through the forest. A orange glow flickered against the trees in the direction of the cabin. They'd found her grandfather's emergency charges, probably triggered them while searching for hidden compartments. Her phone had no signal in the cave, but she managed to climb partway up the rocky chimney using roots and small ledges. From higher up, she could see the cabin's location marked by smoke and flames. Dark figures moved through the trees with flashlights, spreading out in search patterns. One group was heading directly toward her position. Maya slid back down into the cave and checked the backpack. Among her grandfather's papers, she found a hand-drawn map of the local area with several locations marked in red ink. One was labelled Alternate Safe House and appeared to be about 2 miles deeper into the forest, near an old logging road. She had no choice but to keep moving. The Kozlovs wouldn't give up, and staying hidden in the cave would only delay the inevitable. But as she prepared to leave, Maya heard something that made her pause, the distant wail of sirens approaching through the night. Chen must have called for backup before the shooting started. If Maya could stay ahead of her pursuers for just a little longer, help might arrive in time. The hunt was far from over. The abandoned mining office sat like a rotting tooth against the mountainside, its weathered boards grey with decades of neglect. Sarah pressed herself against the trunk of a massive pine, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as she watched Victor's men spread out around the building. 3 vehicles had arrived 20 minutes ago, and she'd counted at least 8 armed figures disappearing into the structure. Marcus touched her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "The entrance is on the far side. We can circle around, but once we're inside, there's no telling what we'll find." Sarah's grandfather's journal felt heavy in her jacket pocket. The final entry had led them here, to the place where everything had started 60 years ago. According to his writings, this was where he'd first discovered the truth about the Kozlov family's stolen Nazi gold, where he'd made the decision that would define the rest of his life. There, Marcus pointed to a narrow gully that ran along the building's eastern wall. "We can use that for cover." They moved carefully, Sarah's pregnancy making every step deliberate. The baby had been active all morning, as if sensing the tension that radiated through her body. She paused, breathing through a particularly strong kick, when the sound of raised voices drifted from inside the building. Victor's accent cut through the mountain air like a blade. "Tear it apart, every board, every stone. It has to be here." Sarah and Marcus reached the back entrance, a door hanging askew on rusted hinges. Through the gap, they could see into what had once been the main office. Maps still clung to the walls, their edges curled and faded. File cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor in drifts of yellowed paper. Victor stood in the center of the chaos, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His men worked methodically, prying up floorboards and punching holes in the walls. But Sarah's attention was drawn to the figure seated in a chair near the window, Detective Ray Morrison, his hands bound, blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. "He followed us," Marcus breathed, his expression grim. Victor grabbed a fistful of Morrison's shirt, jerking his head back. "Where is she? Your little surveillance operation was thorough enough to track her to the cabin. You must have some idea where she'd run." Morrison's voice was steady despite his circumstances. "I told you, I lost her trail after the explosion. Sarah Chen is resourceful, but she's also 8 months pregnant. She can't have gone far." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Morrison had been helping them, risking his career and now his life. She started to move forward, but Marcus caught her arm. "Wait," he mouthed. Victor released Morrison and began pacing, his frustration evident. 60 years my family has searched for what was stolen from us. 60 years of following breadcrumbs left by that old man, and now, when we're so close, a pregnant woman thinks she can keep what's rightfully ours. Maybe it was never yours to begin with," Morrison said, earning himself a backhanded blow that snapped his head to the side. "My grandfather died in a Soviet prison because of what your government stole," Victor snarled. "My father spent his entire life tracking down every piece, every coin. This isn't about money, it's about justice." Sarah's mind raced. Her grandfather's journal had mentioned the Kozlovs, but from a different perspective. According to his account, the gold had been liberated from a Nazi transport train, part of a larger cache stolen from Holocaust victims. The Kozlov family had been among those who'd hidden portions of it, but her grandfather had discovered they planned to keep it, rather than return it to the rightful owners or their descendants. One of Victor's men approached, shaking his head. "Nothing in the walls, nothing under the floor. If there's something here, it's well hidden." Victor's phone buzzed. He answered it curtly, his expression darkening as he listened. I understand." He ended the call and turned to Morrison. It seems your colleagues have discovered the remains of my men at the cabin site. They're asking uncomfortable questions." He drew his weapon, pressing it against Morrison's temple, "which means our time here is limited. One last chance, detective. Tell me where Sarah Chen would run or—" The baby's kick was so strong it made Sarah gasp involuntarily. The small sound seemed to echo in the mountain silence, and every head in the building turned toward their hiding spot. Victor smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "It seems she's come to us instead." Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her as footsteps approached their position. Her hand moved to the small pistol hidden beneath her jacket, her grandfather's service weapon that she'd found in the cabin's secret compartment. She'd hoped never to use it, but as Victor's men surrounded their hiding spot, she realized that hope was about to be tested. The helicopter's rotors sliced through the dawn air as Maya pressed her face to the window, watching the forest canopy blur beneath them. Her grandfather's land, her land, stretched endlessly below, the ancient tree stump now just a dark speck among thousands of others. Detective Chen sat across from her, his weathered face etched with concern as he monitored radio chatter about the cleanup operation still underway. "The last of Kozlov's men were rounded up an hour ago," Chen said, adjusting his headset. "FBI's got them in custody along with enough evidence to put them away for life." Maya nodded, one hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked restlessly. 7 months now, and somehow they'd both survived the nightmare that had consumed the past week. The memory of those final moments in the underground chamber still haunted her, Kozlov's body floating in the flooded tunnel, the ancient walls groaning as water rushed through cracks that had held for nearly a century. "What about the gold?" she asked. Chen's expression grew complicated. "That's where things get interesting. Turns out your grandfather was more clever than anyone realized. The coins Kozlov's people recovered? They were real, but they represent maybe 5% of what's actually down there." Maya's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "We found your grandfather's real safe room, hidden behind a false wall that only opens when the water level drops below a certain point. He'd been moving the bulk of his collection there for years, probably figured if anyone ever found the main chamber, they'd assume they'd gotten everything." The helicopter banked left, heading toward the small airport, where an ambulance waited to take Maya for a thorough medical checkup. She'd insisted she was fine, but Chen had been adamant about getting her proper care after everything she'd endured. "There's something else," Chen continued. "We found journals, dozens of them. Your grandfather documented everything, his work with the resistance, how he got the gold, but also his regrets about cutting ties with your family." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "Regrets?" He was terrified that his past would endanger you and your mother. Every entry for the last 20 years mentions wanting to reach out, but being afraid of what might follow him to your doorstep. Turns out he was right to be cautious. Kozlov had been watching him for decades, waiting for the right moment. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing their descent. Maya watched the ground rise up to meet them, her mind reeling with the implications of Chen's revelation. Her grandfather hadn't abandoned them out of indifference or anger. He'd sacrificed a relationship with his family to protect them. "The estate lawyers are already working on the legal aspects," Chen said as the helicopter touched down. "Given the circumstances and the historical significance of the collection, there'll be some negotiation with various governments about repatriation of certain pieces. But you're looking at a substantial inheritance regardless." Maya barely heard him. As the rotors wound down and medical personnel approached the aircraft, she found herself thinking not about money, but about the baby growing inside her. Her child would grow up knowing the truth about their family's history, both the darkness and the light. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, police interviews, and paperwork. The doctors confirmed what Maya already knew. Both she and the baby were healthy, though they recommended rest and careful monitoring for the remainder of her pregnancy. As afternoon faded to evening, she finally found herself alone in a hotel room, staring out at the small town that had become the center of an international news story. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, who was driving up from Phoenix and would arrive by morning. Another message came from her best friend Sarah, who'd been watching the news coverage with growing alarm. Maya smiled despite her exhaustion. Soon she'd be surrounded by people who loved her, people who would help her figure out what came next. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "We made it," she whispered. "Grandpa's gold is going to change everything for us, but we're going to be smart about it. No more running, no more hiding." Outside, she could see Chen in the parking lot, coordinating with federal agents who would maintain security for the next few days. The immediate danger was over, but Maya had learned enough about her family's history to know that vigilance would always be necessary. The tree stump still stood in the forest, its ancient trunk now guarding secrets that were finally coming to light. Tomorrow, she would begin the long process of deciding what to do with her inheritance, both the gold and the responsibility that came with it. But tonight, for the first time in a week, Maya Chen Rodriguez allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel safe, and to dream about the future she was building for her child.